Welcome to the Esplund University Museum. We are very pleased to host this evening's program, Figuration, Abstraction, and the Spiritual, based on the exhibition David Stern, The American Years. It is very exciting to walk into the museum galleries, smell the paint, and experience the swirls and the impact of those brushstrokes that change with the visitors' movement in the gallery. We invite you, if you haven't seen the show, to go upstairs after the program and see the exhibition as well. Tonight it is my pleasure to introduce Karen Wilkin, my co-curator of this exhibition and curator of the traveling exhibition, who will introduce the panelists and moderate our discussion. Karen Wilkin is a New York-based curator and art critic. Educated at Barnard College and Columbia University, she was awarded a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship and a Fulbright Scholarship to Rome. Ms. Wilkin is the author of monographs on Stuart Davis, Anthony Caro, Kenneth Nolan, Helen Frankenthaler, Giorgio Morandi, and Hans Hopkins, and has organized exhibitions of their work internationally. She is the contributing editor for art for the Hudson Review and a regular contributor to the New Criterion, Art in America, and the Wall Street Journal. Ms. Wilkin teaches in the Master of Fine Arts program of the New York Studio School and has lectured at such institutions as the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., the Guggenheim Museum, New York, the Museum of Modern Art, Tokyo, Tate, Britain, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, New York, and the École des Beaux-Arts, Paris. Karen.
Thank you, Reba. It's a great pleasure to be part of this distinguished company, and I'm really interested in how this is going to turn out, because I don't quite know what we're going to talk about, and I think it's going to be very interesting. We have, as I say, a very remarkable panel of artists and a fellow critic who's here to make me feel not so lonely among all these artists. And starting with Joel Nathanson, who is on your right. Jill is an abstract painter whose work focuses on color and structure. She began exhibiting in the 1980s and has shown in New York at Elizabeth Harris and at June Kelly Gallery. Most recently and also at Laurie Bookstein Gallery, most recently in a group show that I organized at Laurie Bookstein called Color and Structure. Over the years, Jill, in addition to her abstract paintings, which are about the resonance and expressive power of color, has been engaged with the questions of the relationship of art and Judaism in a number of series of works, particularly Seeing Sinai, which was a collaboration with Arnold Eisen, the Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. There's an article on her work by Matthew Bagel at in an upcoming issue of Shema, which I have had the pleasure of reading ahead of time, and it's a wonderful article. I recommend it highly. And she has just finished a project funded by the Memorial Foundation of Jewish Culture, which I think is going to be exhibited somewhere in New York before too long, we hope. Lance Esplund on my left is, as you know, if you've seen the catalog of the exhibition of David Stern, a major contributor to that catalog with a wonderful article illuminating David's work. Lance is the former chief art critic of the much lamented New York Sun and now an art critic for the Wall Street Journal. He has written for publications including art, and continues to write for publications including Art in America, Modern Painters, Harper's, the New Criterion, and the New Republic. And like what I believe are the best critics in the history of criticism, he is a critic who is a friend of artists and who hangs out in studios and has perceptive things to say based on that experience. On my right is Archie Rand, painter, muralist, occasional art writer, who often investigates Jewish content among many, many, many other things in his work. And he's been doing this for a very long time, since he's been showing exhibiting in New York since he was 18. That was quite recently, though, wasn't it?
Yes, last week. Yes.
Archie's also done collaborative books with many celebrated poets, including John Ashbery, Robert Creeley, John Yao, and that's just the tip of the list. He has work represented in the collections of major national and international museums. Former chair of the Visual Arts Department at Columbia University, now CUNY Presidential Professor of Art at Brooklyn College. For the purposes of tonight's discussion, I think Archie's going to be putting on his synagogue painting hat, which is an important hat for him. In 1974, he was commissioned to paint the 18,000 square foot interior of Congregation B'nai Yosef in Brooklyn. I hope we'll be hearing more about that later. In 1984, he did the exterior murals at the Jerusalem Teachers College. In 1989, he painted 54 chapter paintings, which refer to the Jewish divisions of the Torah text, and that became the basis of a 1996 exhibition at the Jewish Museum. And he recently exhibited the 613, a painting which measures 17 feet high by almost 100 feet long, which has an individually painted component for each of the 613 commandments prescribed by Maimonides as being incumbent on Jews. And he also has a life as another kind of painter as well. I don't know quite how he finds time. And at the end of the table is David Stern, who really we should just all go upstairs, and that's really all we need to do as far as an introduction to David Stern. David was born in Essen, Germany, and has been in the United States since 1995. He actually chose to be in this country, which until last Tuesday was a questionable activity. And he has been a U.S. citizen since 2000. David has exhibited widely in Europe, in his native Germany, in Hungary, in Austria, and has also exhibited throughout the U.S., certainly coast to coast in New York and in California. A version of this exhibition is currently in Tulsa University, and we'll be traveling with some additions from this show to other venues in New York. David's work is represented in many distinguished private collections in the U.S., Germany, and elsewhere, and in public collections. And for what else you need to know about David, as I say, you just need to go upstairs. The title of this panel, Figuration, Abstraction, and Spirituality, is in some ways a kind of peculiar one, because there aren't three words that normally go together. Not now. Not in the troubled 21st century following the troubled 20th century with all of its extraordinarily unspiritual events. At the beginning of the 20th century, of course, spirituality and abstraction seemed to be very bound up together. And it was part of a very idealistic, utopian conception of what art could do. That think of artists like Kandinsky, think of artists like Malevich, think of Paul Klee, artists who, in some cases like Kandinsky, were writing overtly about the spiritual in art, and finding that bound up in pure ideal forms, a kind of Platonic ideal, if you like, the notion that everything we see is a reflection of a more perfect, abstract, geometric, archetypical world. The emphasis on this kind of pure, significant geometric form, a kind of abstraction, not the only kind of abstraction, but a kind of abstraction, was seen as evidence of making things better. it was a very deeply ingrained idea at one point in the history of modernism. But now we are much more likely to hear about dystopia than utopia. When you think about figurative art in relation to spirituality, you of course immediately think of the enormous legacy of the history of Western art, in which the Christian Church was one of the major patrons. During the Middle Ages, during the Renaissance, during the Baroque particularly, when the Catholic Church had to muster every image it could get to counteract the insidious anti-image making of the Protestant Reformation. But that wasn't necessarily spiritual. In fact, one doesn't worry about spiritual content as much as religious content, which is a slightly different thing if you're an art historian approaching this work. But we're putting this all together. A dystopian idea of abstraction in the present, figuration detached from narrative, perhaps, and spirituality. And then there's another part of the equation that makes this a particularly interesting question at the present, and that is that the kind of shared, common, widely recognized references that artists before modernism could assume, whether they were references to classical antiquity, references to the Bible, references to history. There was if you were a painter exhibiting at a salon at the beginning of the 19th century, you could assume that with a little bit of help, your audience would get it. Since the advent of modernism, we assume that the narratives that artists address, whether they're overt or tacit, are going to be private narratives, not part of a widely shared discourse. So how does one deal with all this now? All of these components as an artist? And David, since it's your show, you get to go first.
Oh, that's so nice.
Well, I know your images are the first on the list. What we're going to do is have each artist show a group of works, and each artist is going to tell you a bit about those works. Then we're going to keep the images scrolling so that you'll have something to look at in case we don't say anything interesting. And then and we will have a conversation among ourselves about these thorny subjects. So David, you get to introduce yourself first.
Okay. I, of course, started, like the audience knows that, I started that show already, the slideshow.
Well,
so
that's
it's
good. Now
rolling.
they'll know who's who, what's what.
Yeah, this is Archie Wendt, I guess.
Can we fast forward?
No, yeah, we can, maybe. Wait a second, I can't do that. All right, here we go. So I would not necessarily want to talk about about these images necessarily, but I would also say, just in the you made a very compelling points in what this discussion is really about. By obviously you're a deep thinker and you're looking into this historic parts of it. To me, abstraction, figuration, and the spiritual would not mean necessarily in my own work or in my practice necessarily a contradiction. So I'm actually really trying to deal with my figure paintings in an abstract manner. And to me, in general, I would say any art has to have a spiritual aspect to it, otherwise it wouldn't be art. So there has to be something which is being transcended. It doesn't really matter necessarily whether it's figurative art or abstract art, but there's something in it which transcends the motif or the actual the paint, the subject of the painting. So I would say that though it is certainly right, and this is it's great to be reminded on that, but I would really say that in the 21st century, maybe there is a point when you look back, like in the 50s, especially here in the city, the discussions Rosenberg was involved in, where there was still this illusion going on that there would be progression in art. We would have progressive art and progression, like in science we had, like looking at a car from the 50s. Now we're looking at a car from 2000, and they're widely different. So that would be the same thing with art as well. By now, I think we do understand that's not the case. I think that's really not happening. So there is a new cast coming along every generation, and they're grappling with the same questions every generation again. Yeah. So that's so much, maybe, for my first statement.
It's thrown out a lot of very meaty ideas there between the notion of progress and art. And certainly, I mean, categories are very much breaking down. I mean, the categories of media, categories, is it sculpture, is it painting?
Also, I might want to interject here. What you said about before about the reference points, like the history, like in the 18th or 19th century, when you could look at an audience, and the audience would necessarily be informed about all those references because they were educated in the same way. That is all gone away.
Of course.
The audience doesn't really know. Now, even if you do have the reference points, the audience doesn't have it. So it's a matter of education. It's a matter of where we're coming from.
I mean, all you have to do is look at the difference between the monument to General Sherman in front of the Plaza Hotel and the Vietnam Memorial in Washington. Nobody in the 1870s or 80s, whenever that St. Gaudens sculpture went up, had any trouble recognizing the fact this was the hero on the horse and this was victory with the palm of victory in front. Well, you can't do that anymore. The issues have changed. So who's next? That was very informative about your work, David.
So you tell me, I changed the images.
Who's next? Jill? Okay.
There you go. Rock and roll.
You can be much more specific. Nobody will mind.
Well, let's see. There are images of two different kinds of work that I do. What I mostly do in my studio. Can everybody hear? What I mostly do in my studio is color-based abstract painting that I approach in a sort of experimental way. There are certain things that I love about painting, certain things that I want to bring out in painting, certain ways I want the paintings to work, and I go at it with color and try to make it happen. Color is the central issue in my work. I approach the painting as a kind of force field of colors. Colors can unify and give structure to an experience that can't be represented in any other way. Specific color relationships have a very specific kind of energy, and that's really what the paintings are about. I create kinds of push and pull, kinds of dynamics. I sort of set things off balance. But the other kinds of paintings that you're seeing are the Judaic works that I do. For a lot of reasons, and it's kind of partially to do with what has been raised so far, I decided at a certain point that I wanted to research the relationship between abstraction in painting and abstraction in Judaism. There are a lot of ideas within Judaism that have struck me along the road, along the way of life, as being very much related to the way I think about painting. And I've proceeded in a kind of experimental way to see, okay, is it possible to make this explicit? So I do these color paintings that have to do with unity. Unity is essential to painting. The stronger the unity, the more things interact, the stronger the painting. Both Karen and I and other people on this panel knew Clement Greenberg. For him, unity was a key value, and it's also a key value in Judaism. So the first project that I did was a series of Shaviti paintings, which are a kind of Judaica, kind of meditative plaque that had the Hebrew text of Psalm 14, Shaviti Adonai Lenegdi Samid, in color, based as a color field painting. So I kind of tried to create a color field painting that was a piece of Judaica. And then, more recently, some of the pictures that were being shown are part of a collaboration I did with Judaic scholar and Chancellor of JTS, Arnold Eisen, where we actually tried to look at Torah through the lens of color painting. So I'm not sort of in sync with what's on the screen, but one of the things that I found in doing this specifically Jewish work was, on the one hand, it's kind of tortured and difficult to get specific with the relationship between Jewish text and color field painting, something that seems completely anachronistic. But on the other hand, having something in the paintings that the viewers, specifically Jewish viewers, are going to understand is incredibly exciting. It's incredibly exciting to be working in a way where there is a shared understanding of what you're putting into the painting. So again, I'm out of sync. This is pure color paintings where I'm just trying to engage the viewer in color relationships, in push and pull, in field relationships, and I found in the course of Jewish study that some of these ideas of push and pull, of balance, of flow, they exist in some aspects of Jewish understanding, in Kabbalah, for instance. The idea of the Sephirot as emanations of God that are vying for unity in the person who's praying and in the universe. So it's kind of been an experimental project. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. More recently, I've been trying to find a language to deal with the 6 days of creation as something to do with energy, imbalance, desire, materiality, coming out of energy, and the tall image that you'll see when it comes up is the creation of the human being. It's day 6. And I included that because I think it relates somewhat to David's paintings, which strike me as being very much about the human being as a mysterious. Yeah, that's very tall. It's a lot taller than it is here. It's 10 feet tall, and its assemblage pretty much goes up to the ceiling. And even though it looks nothing like David's paintings, it's sort of dealing with a kind of similar notion of what is of the human being. Is it the human being material? Is the human being made of light? That's something that I see very much in David's paintings, is what is the human being?
So this is an abstracted human being.
It's
or
an abstraction
yes, of a human being.
It's sort of the force field of a human being. Right. The first human being in Kabbalah supposedly could see from one end of the earth to the other and was made of the different parts, the different emanations of God, created in God's image as emanations. So that's the way I was thinking about color and material and emanations in this project.
Archie? Can we get some of Archie's pictures to go with?
There you go.
Okay. This is a series of murals that were done for the Jerusalem Women's Teachers College in Jerusalem. They're about 14 feet high, and they're on stone. And the paint chemist Mark Golden, who some of you are familiar with, came up with a system that would make these full color, full palette exterior murals. What I wanted to talk about to build up to this was how I got into this racket. Because artists of my generation and slightly younger existed, I mean, that's basically one of the reasons this panel existed at a very peculiar time, not only in world history but in art history. As I was growing up, it was not unusual for there to be many artists who were Jewish. When I was a kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old, there was a magazine that we got in Hebrew school called World Over, which had cartoon strips in the back of Jewish history that were drawn very well, almost like Classics Illustrated. And inside was an artist named Herb Krukman who did a monthly strip called Herbie, which was terribly drawn, but he was a WPA guy who did this cartoon thing. And one day, he came to my synagogue and stood up there on the bima right in front of the Torah with a newsprint pad. I must have been 8 or 9 years old, and he started to draw Herbie. And I thought, this is really cool. Here I am in a synagogue, and here's this artist that I know. He's been in print, and he's making these pictures. This is day one from a series that was shown here, in fact, at the YUM Museum in a show that Reba Wilkin also curated. Hi, Reba. This is day one of one of the creation series that I've done. It was in that room behind me. Anyway, when I got into high school, I met Maurice Sendak, who was an alum of my high school. And he basically called me over and said, stick around with me, kid. I don't want to talk to the rest of the faculty. So I figured, oh, wow, another Jewish artist. And the only artists I had met were Jewish. This is a series of the Amida paintings. And the reason I included this particular image was because being on the cover of Bomb magazine, it sort of allowed this very Jewish discourse that I was working on into the larger art discourse. So this is sort of proof of that. It's something I've been working with. I know I'm talking in circles because there's a lot I want to say. But I wanted to get Jewish art somehow off the table of a kind of corralled or ghettoed psychology. And simply say to people, well, any kind of cultural emanation has been valid for any group of either disenfranchised or totally dominant cultures. Why is it that when you deal with Jewish imagery, you somehow have to be apologetic or make excuses or explanations for it? And I just decided to hell with it. I'm just going to do this stuff. So this is a series that was shown at the Bernie Steinbaum Gallery. This is the Chad Gadya, and this is a particularly evocative image of the Angel of Death. These paintings are painted on vinyl. They're about 6.5 feet tall. Anyway, I got this commission to do the B'nai Yosef Synagogue in 1974. And there was a rabbinical court case around it where they decided that what I was doing was blasphemy. And this was an Orthodox congregation. So they brought it before a Bet Din, a religious court, and the decisor on this was the great revered Talmudic expert, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who at that time was considered, and still is probably considered, the greatest Talmudic scholar of the 20th century. And Rabbi Feinstein, who was very on in years, looked at the evidence and basically said, this stuff is kosher. And then he soon passed away. And yeah,
there's no relationship there.
It was strange, but his death left me with a great blessing. It left me with the hechsher of being a kosher artist, and I figured, wow, we can do this stuff, you know.
Do you have a stamp somewhere or something?
But the response is printed in some of the sayings of Rabbi Moshe that were published. I picked them up in Borough Park. This is a picture of the 613 in situ, which I showed in a warehouse last May, and as you can see, it really is 17 feet high and 100 feet long. And there's 614 paintings, 613 for each commandment and one as a title painting. Let's see. It's a funny business we're in. Why there are so many artists who have the option to assimilate and not get involved in this kind of chazarai. There's one of the images. That's number one, to know there is a God. I figure if he doesn't know there's a God, he's in trouble. I did these kind of EC comic type images. I wanted the images to be memorable rather than have them as be slaves to the text. I wanted the image to come first, as the wonderful art writer Richard McBee has reviewed this body of work, and he made that very clear. The image coming first is his words, not mine. Thank you, Richard. I figured if Jewish art is going to fly, it's got to be something that flies first as art and doesn't have to make excuses for itself or figure its Jewishness into itself sideways or with some kind of curtsy. So that's the 613 over there. So I've been doing this stuff as a corollary to my work all my life, and I do it just to kind of keep myself juiced, just because nobody really is interested, and people actually get upset by it, and some people dislike it. But as shown by the crowd here tonight, there are some people, in fact, who are interested in that, and I'm happy about that.
Thank you. So now you all know what everybody does, more or less. Lance, as a working critic, do you...
Sometimes working.
A lot of us try to save the sun. Do you find that you approach work differently if you know that there is an explicit content of spiritual content or
A religious
particularly
subject matter or
religious
something?
subject matter? Would that change the way you work?
For me, it's always about the immediate experience of the work of art. Matisse once said that when he goes to the Giotto Chapel in Padua, he doesn't have to know what the title of the panel is about. One of the frescoes, the scenes of the life of Christ. And he says he knows immediately from the sentiment, from what he gets from it, what it's about. He gets it's given to him, almost in a telegraphic. He feels it, and I think for me that's something that has to happen. I mean, I think you can call a work of art whatever you want to call it the Stations of the Cross or not, but it has to, for me, convey something about what that experience is about. I think, I always want to know what a title is, but frankly, if it doesn't immediately hit me, not immediately, I think it takes time, but if it doesn't have something about the power or some of the tension, what you were talking about, push-pull, I mean, to me, all art is spiritual, so that I think that the sense of, and by spiritual I mean it has some kind of tension between, for instance, the two poles, the one of death and of life, and that you're dealing with that tension all the time, and that I think all great works of art contain something about that tension, get you to that place of tension through the forms. So, one of the greatest experiences I've ever had, I think, is at the pyramids, which in all of the Egyptian art is spiritual. It's for the gods. And the pyramids are big, and that they're massive. They're the largest sculptures ever made, I guess. And they're also, I think, the most abstract. And Egyptian art, for the most part, is abstract because it's for the gods, and they don't want to offend the gods by giving them, the stuff that is of our life, but to give them, create a new language for them. And one of the things that happens at the pyramids is that, I think, you're drawn to the base, you're drawn to the center, and when you stand in front of them, they pull you like horses from two different directions, and then you have this sense of ascension and also this sense of kind of falling inward. So they suspend you in a place that I think is about as spiritual a place as you can get. And I guess ever since I've been to the pyramids, I'm always looking for that kind of, okay, how does it compare with what the pyramids do? In terms of, what are you doing for me? What level? Where can you take me? So, I don't know, does that answer your question at all? Kind of?
Yeah.
A little bit? Okay. I'm the token Gentile on the panel, by the way.
we won't discuss my checkered background or lack of education, but it's a tension. It's a tension. Jill, you really work in two very distinct ways. I mean, the tension is within your work as well as within internally in the paintings.
I guess, you know, there's such a bias now toward people making particularly abstract art that's just sort of like really cool, really relaxed, you know, nothing really matters, you just kind of drop stuff on the canvas. And it's kind of the spirit of the moment, and I really can't stand it. I always believed that abstract art had some kind of spiritual basis. And I'm not quite sure how I got into doing this explicitly Jewish art, but part of it had to do with that, with wanting to really just go up against that kind of casual attitude. But also, there's also a real disparaging of the whole aura of art, you know, what you're talking about, the kind of the sense that this is really momentous, you know, pyramid.
Big.
But big in here.
Big in there, yeah. But, I don't know, it's maybe just wanting to fly in the face of the sense that you can't make explicitly religious abstract painting. Maybe that's what did it. But also a sense that there was such a conflict between the ethos of the art world and being an artist and the ethos of Judaism, which had become increasingly fascinating to me. So, yes, it's sort of a strange thing. It's very different, very skitsy. Mm-hmm. And the paintings are very different. I think that the paintings that I do that are religious are really not totally art for art's sake. They're really about a kind of research into the nature of art, the nature of religion. They're really, you know, probably not ever going to be pure art, but fascinating to do nonetheless.
David, you're the only artist on this panel who doesn't do two kinds of art.
Yeah, I only do one kind. I hope it's art. I hope so. You know, what Jill just said, or said in her statement also before, I think that any kind of art, it doesn't matter whether it's abstract or it's figurative or whatsoever, I would agree with Lance there, it has to have that pyramid effect. And you know, when you look at when I look at my own process of working, it is like building a house of cards, you know. So there is an implied tension there anyway, and I think that can be also the case if you do an abstract painting, because you have there's a logical development there. You start with a very wide base and you put them together, and in the end you can only put one card on the top, and if that card doesn't fit, the whole house breaks down. And that is basically how I work, and I feel it, you know, every time I start a painting, and I believe that is part of every you know, artist who works with some kind of risk. I mean, there is some risk involved, and unlike in writing, you know, like in writing, there's not so many ways of reversal there, because everything is going to be lost, right? I mean, you know, if I do something on this canvas, if I do another stroke there, then the canvas is changed and it's lost, and I don't have a copy from before. I don't have my first draft. The first draft is gone. So there is something like a tension there, which...
you just don't know the keystroke to get back to.
Yeah, right. Yeah, these are digital images, as you know.
Command C. You know, just.
Yeah.
I think also you're very involved with trying to keep the painting moving and not stopping.
Yeah.
The painting is constantly in flux, the color.
But I think
everything
also what you said. I mean, when you spoke about that, that you have the feeling that you are Jewish or your Jewish paintings are not really like pure art or so. It might have to do with the intent, the intention. I mean, it's like when you, there's always the difficulty and the danger that when you start with a preconceived idea, which is very strong, that you're losing the, you don't give yourself a chance for some kind of happening, some kind of chance, some kind of, having the painting coming back at you with something. So, because you need to put those letters in there, or you need to put, something in there which you conceive as, the theme of the painting.
Right, although it was really getting to those paintings to have the letters function as light.
That's
the thing is that
I
I've
didn't want
had
to
to throw
attack
away
the
so many
letters.
of these paintings.
Okay.
That's the thing is that it doesn't, it's so unnatural to work that way.
But that's the tightrope you
That's the
choose to walk in those paintings. It's just because you are such an intuitive painter, normally responding to what is going on with surface and color in very much the same way you do, and that, from my point of view, is something that's essential if you're going to be making anything resembling serious art. But how do you put one foot in both camps and end up with something that you can feel proud of? I mean, it's a very challenging task. Archie, you work with very explicit images very often. How does this play into your interpretation of the spiritual?
I find that any artists who come into prominence after Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg have at their disposal both the representational and what's taken to be the non-representational forms of depiction equally available to them as basically equal languages. I mean, at that point, abstraction's 100 years old, and it's really as recognizable as any kind of advance in figuration. I don't know whether there's really a difference. I don't know if artists can bifurcate themselves psychologically. I was talking to Malcolm Morley once, and I said to him, it's really interesting the way, like, you've got those parrots sitting there on the trees, and then, like, the negative space. I didn't use the word negative space. I never used that word. But, like, the sky is coming through, between the trees and the parrots and stuff like that. And Malcolm's looking at me like I'm nuts. He's looking at me like... And I finally figure, I'm saying the wrong thing. And he starts shaking his head. And I can hear him thinking, wrong. So I said, well, what's your take on this? And he says, what are you talking about, man? You're talking about like figure ground, figure field? And I said, sheepishly, yeah. And he said, there's no such thing as figure field. It's all figure. And I thought, wow, that's absolutely true. Because once you realize it's all figure, then you realize basically it's all image. And once it's all image, there's very little difference between what I do and what Jill does and what David does and what thousands of other painters do. What finally hits your retina and burns itself into your brain is that picture. And you either relate to it as something you can enter, because painting basically is an act that, unlike sculpture, which is something that's real, if you're tactily involved with a sculpture, you can't deny its physical existence. But in order for a painting to exist, it has to be translated by the mind. Otherwise, it's a piece of cloth with a bunch of junk on it. And all paintings at that point are indistinguishable from each other. There's no difference between, some third-generation piece of, garbage lying in the street and the Mona Lisa. It's basically a cloth with some dirt on it. And what makes a painting work is the uniquely human ability to relate that to some pre-existent memory, and even more so to align that memory with some narrative. And in order for that to happen, a pre-existing sense of belief has to set in. And I'm not talking about representational belief, because that belief happens when you look at a Barnett Newman or a Morris Lewis just as well as if you look at a Norman Rockwell. somehow it generates a sense of a lived and learned truth, and it acts as a metaphor for that, which the mind is satisfied, almost like, having nutrition by soaking up. So, when one feels comfortable dealing figuratively or non-figuratively with work, that's simply a matter of how one responds to one's training. In my particular case, I was a student of Leonard Anderson's, who was a greatly regarded figurative painter, at exactly the same time that I was hanging out with Larry Poons. And a lot of my friends thought that that was a kind of schizophrenic existence, but at the time, I looked around and realized that you could open an art magazine and you could see Helen Frankenthaler and turn the page and see Larry Rivers or Alex Katz or Neil Welliver or Fairfield Porter. And I thought, it's all one big mess at this point. And I think that the dissolution that we've seen in painting recently is simply the after effect of that thing that was set into motion probably after abstract expressionism started to dissolve. I know that Jules Zalitsky Jules called me up once. He was doing if I'm talking too much, cut me off. Jules called me up once.
One more anecdote.
One more. But this is like about the spirituality in non-objective work, or supposedly non-objective work. And he said he was doing a synagogue in Toronto, and he was doing a Magen David. And he knew that I was working, with this kind of biblical research in the B'nai Yosef murals, and he said, I want to paint the colors of the Elyon, of the afterlife, of the world to come. And this was Jules's actual words to me, and he was deadly serious. And we met and had lunch, and I gave him all the research that I had, and he was very grateful for it. And he ended up...
And he also teamed up with Mark Golden.
Yeah, well, Mark is our point man. Without Mark, nothing happens. But there's.
Please mix me a color of the universe.
Well, actually, he did. Jules was very proud of it. He told me the colors that he used.
I've seen it.
Yeah, but there's a case of somebody using a pre-existing, iconic image, using basically a non-objective or abstracted colors, and having an absolute sense of belief that he was painting something totally real as a Cezanne apple.
Well, your supposedly abstract Pole friend, Larry Poons, is painting all kinds of peculiar things into his paintings these days, and they may have always been there. We just didn't see them under the layers. You could also argue, and I've heard this argument made many times, and it's certainly, it's written right up on the wall in the Morandi exhibition. Nothing is more abstract than reality. And of course, the other cliche argument is that all paintings are abstract because they are fictions, because they are the stuff on the. So you can dance around that one quite comfortably for quite a while.
David, is there much? I haven't studied all of the paintings, but are any of them explicitly? Some of them are explicitly Jewish. Yes, some of them have explicit Jewish content, or no?
Not in the sense that I would have a it happened to be this painting Hallel there, which is on the I happened to give it that name. Mm-hmm. But it was actually about the sensation, I did not grow up Orthodox, so and I grew into this and had some real excitement about discovering certain things in Judaism. And one of those things was to see myself in this garb, with the talis over the head and the tefillin on and so on. So, and that was quite exciting, and this was not this painting before. So there was something underneath. I did a small series called Dancing in the Studio, where I had it was like a look at myself, like a self-portrait in the studio with all the colors and with all the paint swirling around me. And that was the last of these, and it morphed into this when I came here. So, but that is pretty much the only image which has a Jewish name, so to speak. Though I have been working for the last year or so on a lithograph project I want to do, which is called Synoptics, and which is based on the Kabbalistic view of the human body. So it's a synoptic view of the human body. It's along the lines of the Sphirot, so the left side, the right side, the middle column, what it means to bring this together. It goes too far here, but that I see as it's a very difficult project because and that's probably also the reason why I chose lithographs to do this, because it's kind of filtering the first of all, it's on paper. I call it an illumination as well. So, and I try to illuminate those relationships between the left and the right, and the white and the red, and so on. And the idea is to have like 7 large panels, which consist of 7 images. And they are in the Sphira order of the lower 7 Sphirot, so it's 49 images. And each image has 7 colors to it, and they rotate through each other. So it's quite a project. But that is the only thing I have done so far, or I'm thinking about doing, which has started from that kind of analytical point of view, and I would hope that I'll be able to get over the point of illustration and really have an illumination, so where things are where things are transcend that idea of the left and the right and the middle.
How important to you when these go out into the world? How important to you will it be that for people to know what the origins of these images are?
I didn't get that.
When this series is exhibited, and Lance and I go in to write about it, how important is it for us to know what you just said?
I would hope not at all. I would hope it's not necessary for you to know that this background at all. It would hopefully point you to creation, to the idea of creation. So as what you said before, like man in the image of God, and so I would hope it would point you to that. I mean, if it doesn't, then it's a problem. If I have to have a text for you, that's a problem.
The pyramid effect. Just one more question about that, and then I think we should open it up to audience questions. Since any print reverses, was that a consideration of doing this as a print series and not as simply works on paper?
No, no, not really. But that's a good point also, because it's kind of part of it. But what was more important is that printing. I mean, lithographs, stone lithographs, is like a sculptural process. So if you layer, and it plays a very big role which color comes first. Yeah. So, and if we mathematically rotate this through, we are giving basically a chance, a big option to play, though I still want an image. I still want that disjointed body. I still want that, not disjointed, but the synaptic body to come across. So it's a pretty insane project, I guess.
I think, as I say, we should open this up to questions from the audience. Yes?
Kind of a question, I guess. What this points to me is kind of like the split between modernism and postmodernism, and it kind of points to an interesting way vis-a-vis Jewish identity, because if you don't hold Jews responsible for being poor artists or too involved with narrative, something like that, you kind of have to look at the artwork and say that there has been enough attention spent on Jewish attitudes towards art and a kind of suppression of artists that may have come from Jewish roots, that it's kind of in the work and can be seen, but kind of like that information has been whitewashed out of the historical narratives. My question would be, from your own points of view, do you see, I don't know how to say this, I guess, to me, mid-century high modernism is kind of dictated by Greenberg, and Greenberg seems to be very specific in what he's looking at.
It's not dictated by anybody.
Okay, but it seems to be kind of a certain way of looking at narrative and image and figuration and abstraction. Okay, at least the mid-century way of looking at things. And my question is, can you see limits within your own orientations as to address the bigger issue of spirituality or image at all?
Well, let me just, I mean, my answer would be that, right now, I kind of don't see there to be any big conflict between figuration and abstraction. That's like it's really over. I mean, the Morandi show is so abstract, But I do see there to be a conflict about meaning, about a sense of a painting having meaning, about this visual field as being something that you have a subjective experience of that matters. Paintings matter, something mattering. That is really not what's happening right now. And I think all three of us, feel that very strongly, that painting has some kind of spiritual content, that it matters, that it can do something to people. So I see that as being kind of the point of conflict right now. I mean, Mary Heilman has this show up, it's called Some Pretty Colors, and that's where color painting is now. She's got a show opening at MoMA. She's a good painter, but it's all about it doesn't really matter. And, how do you make it okay, again, to, really have this kind of content?
Nice. Do you have something to say about that?
I don't know. I'm just listening to what you're saying. I do think that's one of the major issues, and I've gotten into trouble on panels before for saying that art has a moral dimension, and that what you choose to do has a moral dimension relative to what you're doing. And I think if you're not engaged morally with your art, if you see it just as pretty colors or decorative in the worst sense of the word, throwaway or irony, or then what the hell are you doing with your life, with your vocation, with your engagement with culture, society, the people around you, and the art of the past, which I think that's one of the. I think everybody at this table is involved in art because they love art in some way, and that's how it kind of moves from artist to artist to artist, from person. Art stays alive inside you. I don't worry that painting is going to die, because as long as there are Titians out there, people will see Titian, they will love Titian, they will find painting again. So I don't worry about. I think it's kind of a petty, kind of ridiculous. It's like I just don't even care. I don't like that it's happening, but I just.
With any luck, it'll go away.
With any luck, exactly.
But your question made me think of something that the sculptor Anthony Caro has said very often, who, by the way, has a chapel that he did for the Church of Saint Jean-Baptiste in a tiny little town in northern France has just been inaugurated. They loved what he did so much, they asked him to do the altar, the tabernacle, the lectern, the processional cross, and as his wife says, not bad for a Jewish boy. It's extraordinary. There were things that he could not do. It had to be abstract. He didn't want to make an imitation human being. And the whole notion of abstraction needed defending in the late 50s, which he feels is no longer true. Abstraction is such an established part of the language. It's just, as Archie says, another alternative. So it's very liberating. And he's got in this complex of enterable towers and reliefs that are extraordinarily abstract until you get really involved with them and you discover that there are figures that are, ceramic, recognizable images that are carrying some narrative within this steel world. He's letting it all happen. Yes?
I was interested in this question that's making, I thought, where where religion enters in, where that dimension enters into the painting, and at what point, before or after or during. And I was very interested in the answers, so I'm asking this question. Given the answers that Archie and John David have given, how do you think that Mark Chagall or Abraham Ratner would have answered that question?
I don't know, but I think it is probably for Chagall. It has to do. I think it has to do with experience. I mean, Marc Chagall he grew up in the Städte, and he was for a while. He was on the very forefront of the Russian avant-garde, of the revolutionary Russian avant-garde, and then he reverted back to kind of religiously inspired paintings, which informed a whole generation of Jewish reception and recipients, and also of Jewish artists. So, but I think it had to do with him living there, and with him going through this and seeing this, and the Luft, this idea, the Luftmensch, The Luftmensch is a guy who doesn't have anything else than spirituality, because he didn't have anything. They didn't have anything to eat. They didn't have anything to clothe their bodies with. So that's my answer.
The differences between Chagall and Ratner, the two people that you use, are extraordinary. Chagall's topic isn't religion at all. Chagall's topic is the Jewish cultural community, which doesn't exist anymore. By the time that information came into Ratner's hands, we didn't have a Jewish cultural community. In fact, even people in this room remember that New York used to have a delicatessen on each corner. The Jewish cultural community, which would have been a great topic, is just a memory, which is probably one of the reasons people of my generation want to reinvest ourselves back into this. By the time Ratner got into the picture in the 40s, the Holocaust was going on, and really all you could salvage was the Jewish religious aspect. Now, the question of religion versus spirituality are two different things. For instance, I disagree with David's own analysis of his own pictures. Again, if I go on, cut me off. I'm a professor. I talk. All right. I walked into.
Reva will pull the hook out
Okay.
when she's.
I walked into the exhibition upstairs, and I saw something that startled me, something I rarely see. An artist that I'm extremely fond of, that doesn't get a lot of coverage in America, is somebody that incidentally Karen is also extremely fond of and has written a great book on this artist, and that's George Braque. There was an interview with Braque in a 1961 Horizon magazine where Braque is painting one of his large black birds. The painting's about 6 or 8 feet wide. And he's been working on the painting for 5 years when the interviewer comes to him. I'm answering your question, by the way. And the bird is almost in silhouette on the flat canvas. It just sketched it out and painted it black. And for 5 years, he's been painting the sky, and the sky has about 3 inches of paint on it. Yeah. Yes. And he says, and the interviewer says to him, most people would be concerned with getting the bird accurately and leaving the sky alone. And Braque says, no. He says, once I've made the image of the bird, I realize people will get the bird. He said, but I keep this, he said, but this painting isn't finished because I'm not sure that the sky has enough integrity to hold the bird aloft. Now that's a spiritual content. And when I look at David's Soho paintings, those skyline paintings that he did, I notice the sky sits on top of the buildings. Now an academic could look at that and say, well, that's a kind of Cézanne piece of information. But the fact is, by saying that, they're falling into the old art historical trap, because Cézanne went to church every Sunday, and that's the reason that Cézanne put his skies on top of things. So there are spiritual questions that art historians don't deal with. And if you bring that into the notion of the flimsiness and the membrane of religion, then the question becomes a lot more meaty and a lot more pithy. But that's my answer. Okay.
I think we have time for one more question.
Pleasure.
Yes.
Oh, that's okay, yeah. Oh, it doesn't really, it's, you know, I remember when I was, what? The question was, why does one have to worry about whether or not spirituality is okay? Yeah. I remember when I was a student at Bennington, one of the students from my class was starting to get successful, and I said, wow, you know, how do you do that, you know? And he said, just don't do anything transcendent.
I guess that's where we better end.
So there is a just sort of an acceptance in the culture that, you know, the cooler the better, and so you don't need it to be you don't need it to be accepted by other people, but it's a matter of getting it out there as part of the dialogue that you're not being old-fashioned.
We can't hear you.
I have an art background.
Yeah.
I became a poet. I'm so glad. But because I think this kind of rhetoric is problematic. The kind of rhetoric of worrying what the art world cares about. I mean, I think what matters is what a vision, an artist's vision is about, and let the art world come up to that vision. You know, anyway, that's what I was.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you all. We could keep going for a long time, but we have to move on.